Spring training is a world full of optimism, young players, and small sample sizes. When those three things combine, you can get some pretty interesting outcomes. We see role players put up superstar-type numbers, we see established veterans put up numbers that minor leaguers would even be disappointed in. There are a few instances where players get hyped up because of their star performance in spring, only to be completely forgotten just months later. A player could get a hit in 60% of their at-bats in spring, bat .600, and then be one of the worst hitters in the league during the regular season. That not only could happen, it actually did. There was even a time where the best hitter in spring training was out of Major League Baseball entirely just a few months later. A player dubbed the next Jose Bautista would never play a Major League game again less than a year after his spring training performance. These are all really a lesson on small sample sizes and false hope, but they do turn out to make a lot of interesting stories. Before we get into it, only 15% of you watching this are subscribed, so if you enjoy the video, I would really appreciate it. It's completely free, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. There's no better place to start this discussion than with Yankees legend Greg Bird. Now, if you're a Yankees fan, you probably know that Greg Bird was never really a productive player in the majors. In 2017, however, he gave a glimpse of what could have been in spring training. In 23 spring training games, Bird hit 8 home runs, had a batting average of .451 with an on-base percentage of .556, a slugging percentage of 1.098, that's an OPS of 1654, and a WRC plus of 303, meaning he was 203% better than the league average hitter. That is the highest WRC plus of any player in spring training with at least 50 plate appearances since 2006, when spring training stats became official. Now, because of this performance, Yankees manager Joe Girardi came out and said that the way he's hitting the ball now, I think he can be a middle-of-the-order hitter for us. That was not true. In fact, Greg Bird would not last as a major league hitter in general due to both injuries and performance. In the 2017 regular season, Bird missed time due to a foot injury and played in just 48 games at the major league level. During those 48 games, Bird posted just an 87 WRC plus, much lower than the number he recorded in spring training. He hit only 9 home runs in the regular season compared to the 8 he hit during spring. He was worth negative .3 FWAR, the worst season of his career. In 2018 and 2019, he also would never live up to the 2017 preseason hype, as he was worth negative .1 WAR and negative .2 WAR in those seasons respectively. This was definitely a big disappointment for Greg Bird fans and Yankees fans, but an even crazier downfall was Mike Brosseau in 2023. The 2023 Cactus League was dominated by a relatively surprising player in Mike Brosseau. In 41 plate appearances, he hit to a 1512 OPS and a 269 WRC+, the second highest amongst all qualified players that spring. This was enough to solidify himself a role on the Brewers' major league roster. Going into the spring, Brosseau was certainly not guaranteed a roster spot, but he had played so well that he left the Brewers with no choice. Though this role would be short-lived, as through 29 games in the regular season, he had a much lower 74 WRC+, and was worth negative .4 WAR. The Brewers designated him for assignment in July, and by the end of the month, he signed with the Chibolote Marines of the NPB. It took just 3 months for Brosseau to turn from the Brewers' spring training MVP to being completely out of Major League Baseball. He signed with the Royals in 2024 and with the Padres for 2025, but he's never been able to work his way back into the majors. Currently, he has a 45 WRC plus for the Padres in the 2025 spring training, not quite the same success he had 2 years prior. This story is quite similar to the story of 2011 spring training standout for the Baltimore Orioles, Jake Fox. Since 2006, when spring training stats became official, there have only been 2 players to record double-digit home runs in spring training: Ryan Howard and Jake Fox. The latter you might not be familiar with, as Fox is far from a household name. In fact, before 2011, he was not really regarded as a player to have any hype at all. Fox even admitted himself that going into 2011 that he was not a very appealing player. He didn't really have a spot to play in the field, as no matter where you put him, his defense was lacking. The only way that he would find his way into a major league roster was to hit, and he did just that. In just 78 plate appearances, Fox hit 10 home runs on his way to a 178 WRC+, a much better number than anyone would have expected. Fox said during this spring training stretch, the ball looked like a beach ball coming in. Manager Buck Showalter was very impressed with this showing, and several people following the team believed he should crack the opening day roster against all odds. He did, in fact, make the opening day roster because of this performance. His playing time would be few and far between with the Orioles, and during the regular season, he hit 2 home runs, a fifth of what he put up in spring training. He posted a 104 WRC+, which is above average, but his defense was so poor that he was worth negative .3 WAR. That number is well below average. This year was the final year Fox appeared in the majors, and the player that SportsCenter called the next Jose Bautista never lived up to that impressive 78 plate appearance sample. In the past 10 seasons, if you had to guess who held the qualified spring training batting title, you may say someone like Shohei Ohtani. That would be a good guess. Ohtani, however, finds himself in second place with his 2021 season where he hit .554. First place was everyone's next guess, 2021 Kevin Newman, of course. In 39 plate appearances, Newman had a .606 batting average, the highest recorded batting average in spring training since 2006 from a player with at least 30 plate appearances. The average was even above 700 before he went hitless in his last 2 games that spring. This performance was crucial to Newman as it won him the opening day shortstop spot ahead of Eric Gonzalez and Cole Tucker. Newman had lost the shortstop job in 2020 after he posted a 53 WRC+ over 44 games. This spring performance, though, was false hope as Newman went right back to his 2020 form once the regular season hit, batting just .226 with an on-base percentage of .265, a slugging percentage of .309, and OPS of .574, good for a WRC+ of 52. That number made him the worst qualified hitter in the league in 2021 by a pretty large margin, with David Fletcher being the next worst at 69 WRC+. The fact that Newman was a former first-round pick by the Pirates could have added to the hype, as maybe he was finally living up to his pre-draft potential, but no, just another day's work for a small sample size. In some ways, this could be considered the biggest spring training outlier ever, as he went from having the best batting average in recorded history to the worst hitter in the league once the calendar flipped to the regular season. This next entry, however, was certainly the most painful outlier. Also in 2021, there was another spring training record that was recorded. This one was by Mets second baseman Jeff McNeil. Now, if you look at McNeil's numbers from that spring, you might be questioning this decision. There are some pretty poor numbers, but not really even that bad to be considered a huge outlier. But we are omitting one key stat here, and that is the hit by pitch. In the 55 times that McNeil stepped up to the plate in spring training, 8 of them he got hit. This broke the spring training record formerly held by Ricky Weeks from 2009. Now, this one didn't really make an impact on the Mets roster decisions, and in fact, nobody has really even acknowledged this from what I can find. If you look up Jeff McNeil hit by pitches in spring training on Google, nothing of relevance comes up, which isn't really surprising because this record isn't impacting much. During the regular season that year, in 426 plate appearances, McNeil was hit by a pitch only 10 times. In spring training, he was hit at a 15% rate, and during the regular season, he was hit at a 2% rate. That's quite the difference. I was curious to see just how impressive of a span this was in general, not just in spring training, and recently, this was actually outdone. In April of 2024, Leo Jimenez also recorded 8 hit by pitches, but in a 45 plate appearance span. This is around an 18% rate. Almost 1 in every 5 times Jimenez stepped to the plate, he was hit by a pitch in that 45 plate appearance span. This didn't happen in spring training, it was just a small sample of the regular season, so McNeil still holds this painful record. I think we've heard enough for now of the offensive side. Let's talk about an outlier pitcher. We have to go back to the 2019 Cardinals when Dakota Hudson was cutting down the Grapefruit League hitters. Hudson recorded a 1.25 ERA and a 2.85 FIP in 21 2/3 innings. These were great numbers coming from one of the Cardinals' top prospects at the time, a former first-round pick, and he also had a really good small sample out of the bullpen in the 2018 regular season. With multiple of these successful small samples and a high draft pedigree, it would be easy to buy into the hype that this guy could be a great pitcher in the major leagues for years to come. Hudson was on the fringe of the Cardinals' rotation heading into the spring, but after this performance, he was slotted into the rotation, starting in 32 games and pitching 174 2/3 innings for the Redbirds in 2019. He posted a 3.35 ERA, which is a solid number, but was not really that great of a pitcher. His FIP was near 5 and his xFIP sat at 4.55. In 2021, Hudson underwent Tommy John surgery, and in 2022, the ERA rose to 4.45, and in 2023, it went to 4.98, much closer to what it was expected to be based on his underlying numbers. In 2024, Hudson pitched 89 innings for the Rockies, posting a 6.17 ERA and a 5.53 FIP. Obviously, these are much worse than what he did 6 years ago in spring training. This outlier brings an extra lesson beyond the small sample size, the fact that ERA is not the best stat at predicting future ERA, believe it or not, which I've talked about before, but that's a topic for another time. We've talked about plenty of players that were much better than they actually were in spring training, but what about the opposite? What about the players who are generally referred to as stars and have a long track record of being productive in the majors that struggle in the spring? To see one of the biggest examples of this, we need to go back to the 2014 Red Sox, and we need to talk about David Ortiz. Ortiz had 40 plate appearances that spring, and they did not go well, as he had a batting average of 54, had an on-base percentage of 125, a slugging percentage of 162, good for an OPS of 287, and a WRC plus of -26. Obviously, if you know anything about David Ortiz, you would know that these numbers aren't quite what we would expect from him, even later in his career. There weren't too many concerns about Ortiz's ability, but when asked about his performance in the spring, Ortiz said that he was probably too old for spring training. And that was probably true, as in the 2014 regular season, Ortiz saw his WRC plus go back up to 134 over 602 plate appearances. In 2015, it was 139, and in his final season, 2016, it was 163. So, if there was any doubt about Ortiz because of that spring, he proved that wrong pretty quickly. For the pitching version of this, the best example is probably Cliff Lee in 2009. In 2008, Cliff Lee won the AL Cy Young, posting a 2.54 ERA and a 2.83 FIP, both leading the American League over 223 innings. In the 2009 regular season, he posted slightly worse but still great numbers, an ERA of 3.22 and a FIP of 3.11 over 231 innings. The spring training in between these seasons, however, was not as pretty. Lee's 2009 spring training included 6 starts that went for a total of 21 2/3 innings, and this time he had a 12.46 ERA. Now, obviously, this number didn't affect Lee's chances of making the team in 2009, but if these numbers came from a borderline MLB pitcher, they almost certainly would have started out the year at the minor league level or at some reduced role. This spring training wasn't actually that bad if you look a little deeper. His FIP was much lower at 4.91, and his xFIP was 4.51. His walk and strikeout rates were much closer to his career averages than the ERA total. This is because it takes much less of a sample for strikeout rate and walk rate to stabilize than a stat like ERA. If you look at this graph that shows the nature of stabilization for some stats, K rate, walk rate, and home run rate are some of the metrics that stabilize the quickest. Although this graph is for hitters, pitchers' rates are relatively similar. FIP is a stat that only takes these 3 things into account: walks, strikeouts, and home runs, which makes it more reliable for a small sample than ERA is. This can help make roster decisions when you have access to only small samples, but that wouldn't apply much here as Cliff Lee was already an established star. And as I said before, this 2009 spring training wasn't indicative of his 2009 regular season at all, as he had a much better year. These spring trainings were full of surprises, insane statistics, and the repeated lesson of small sample sizes. From Greg Bird's overachieving spring to the brief moments of promise from players like Mike Brosseau, Jake Fox, Kevin Newman, to even the Giants like Ortiz and Lee looking relatively bad. These stories remind us that one explosive performance in spring training doesn't guarantee sustained success and vice versa. This shows the unpredictable nature of baseball and statistics as a whole, where numbers can look great in the short term but only tell part of the story once the season unfolds. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you enjoyed, and let me know an outlier that I missed because there are surely more of them out there. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.